Sorry, I am politely waiting for other people to say something, but I suppose that clip from that bloke, is it a way in? Because I was a little bit, I looked at it and I thought, well, I think I reacted quite strongly against it, actually, in many respects. Racism is not, I'm not sure if I agree with, but racism is a spectrum. I think, racism is about power, which I'm sure you know anyway. So I feel like it was just a bit like, is that a way in to get people who have power and can be racist to acknowledge their own bias? Because I don't want to acknowledge my own bias. I do know my own bias, but generally I don't have power, I'd say, to, be awful to East Anglians, for example, in society. So I just think it was a bit, I felt like it undermined our argument a bit.
I think given the audiences that we're trying to reach in subjects that have never even had to consider bias, it is a better way in. When we talk about bias, people automatically bristle and go, I'm not a Nazi, so therefore I'm a good person, the end. And so this is a way in. We've used this video with staff and students. It is a way in to open up discussions that otherwise can't be opened, because we can have a higher level discussion about power, about racism, but not if we don't have a starting point. And so for a lot of our staff and students, this is a starting point on bias that they wouldn't otherwise be open to. And I think for us, it's how can we have those discussions as that starting point to move forward from that. We're working with Professor Patricia Devine out of University of Madison, Wisconsin-Madison. So her work on bias habit breaking. So bias is a habit that needs to be broken through hard work, through persistent hard work, not one afternoon with us, for example. It's not going to do it. But we can talk about strategies that we know are evidence-based to work. But those strategies still have to be, the individual still has to feel like, I have a bias I need to address. And we can't start there unless we have a way in. And so for me, this is a gentle way in, a more gentle way in to have those discussions. And we can come to the higher level discussions or the more nuanced discussions, the more complex discussions, but not if they're already closed, not if the door's already closed.
Hi there, Jenny Owen from London South Bank. My question is about anonymous marking. Have you looked at that as a factor?
We haven't, although I'm quite suspect of just the notion of anonymous marking, because it assumes a lot, assumes too much, actually, I would say. So we haven't yet looked at that, but we are working with two of our intervention schools at Portsmouth in the next year, our second year of this project, as peripheral projects. So then it's still tied to the Changing Mindsets project, but it's something we wanted to do with separate funding with these projects to look at feedback. So with two different schools, two different discipline areas, we'll be looking at anonymous feedback given to their first years to look for. We'll be looking for patterns. So, is there assumptions made in some of the words that they're using for feedback? I mean, as anybody else, I don't agree that anonymous feedback is anonymous. I just don't.
No, but the NUS are pushing it hard.
Sure. But even if we think about our 5 faculties, the faculties that have some of the worst BME attainment gaps have anonymous marking, and some of our faculties that have a lot more standardized testing, whether I like those or not, have lower gaps.
Got 2 questions, so I'll come to the back first.
In terms of your work with students, how have you found the reception from them when you show them this data? Because something we've been discussing at the moment is how, we were discussing it today actually, how we talk about this sort of stuff quite a lot as staff in universities, but showing this data to students and actually exposing the levels of inequality, like what has the reception been from them? And is it disengagement or is it empowerment to kind of try and change them? We're
working with first years, and often starting either induction week or right after induction week. We actually don't show the attainment, the data we just showed. Not because I don't want to. It's already stressful enough being first year, first week. It is something I want to talk to students about, and when we have further conversations with them, we do talk to them about the persistent inequalities. We talk about the overall UK numbers, but what I'm afraid of, and whether it's the right or wrong choice, is first in family, a BME student comes to, we say, look at, you're probably 20 to 46% less likely to get a first or a 2-1. Welcome to Portsmouth. I think the work has to be done by those with power to do it, and that's going to be the staff, and it's going to be the leadership at the university. It's not that students shouldn't have this data, and it is accessible. It's not like they can't have it. But when we're talking to them, we do talk about the national numbers rather than this is what's going to happen to you.
Thank you. Jess, when you compare your two faculties, one with a 3% difference and one with a 30% difference, when you build the relationships with the staff there and talk to them, are they speaking differently? Is the 3%, did it used to be 30% and it's come down? Are they just more awake, more, or is it just a different set of biases? Because I noticed it was sort of the technology and science subject areas. Are those staff just biased in a different way that, all Asian people are great at tech, kind of? Have we swapped biases for a new set of biases?
So I will say the two schools with the wildly different attainment gaps are in the same faculty. They're not in different faculties. Neither school knew their gaps. So neither school was like, well, of course we have this gap because of this wonderful thing we do or this terrible thing we do. So it was a surprise for both schools. What I'd like to be able to say is, what's the school doing that's 3%? I'd like to be like, they have 3% because, but we don't know that yet. We know that they haven't. We know that most of their assessments are standardized. It's right or wrong, rather than written. Which I'm not saying we should but it's something to be said. The other one has also standardized testing, but includes some essay writing as well. So I think what we can say for sure is that now they know, but they didn't know before. And I don't think, because they're in the same faculty, I can't say, it's because it's discipline. I mean, they're pretty similar disciplines. So sadly, I don't have the answer. Well, hopefully we'll find something out. We have another year.
One last question, or?
Do you think it's realistic to have a 0% attainment gap in light of the problem existing for at least
Hundreds and hundreds of years. Yeah.
Yes. And if we're talking about the root of this is racism, inherent racism within our society, can we really reach 0% without a major overhaul in
everywhere?
in society? Yeah. And part of the reason that I say that is, in some ways, equality law has, of course, done wonderful things, but at the same time, it's made the idea of being racist, sexist, homophobic, disablist, ageist, horrible, a horrible idea to the educated individual who doesn't want to admit that, and you've kind of pointed at that. So is it a realistic goal?
Is 0% possible?
Or is it a pie in the sky goal?
I mean, for me, I think hundreds of years have built this racism, so it's not going to be 1 year that we're going to fix it, or 2 years. These projects are funded for 2 years. Do I think that we shouldn't set the 0% as a goal? No. But is it possible in my lifetime? I hope, but I also think I believe it's still worth the work and the fight. Even if I pass the baton with my last breath, I still think it's worth the fight, even if it's not in my lifetime. But the 0% should be the only goal for me, because it should be true equality. We shouldn't set some other goal like, it'd be great if it was just 10%. That'd be so cool, because it's still a terrible, terrible inequality. So for me, the 0% is the only goal that should be set. But will we see it in my lifetime? I'm not sure. But I still think it's worth fighting for, and I still think it's worth working for.
Hear, hear. All right then. So we're just. One more. I'm being told to ask one more question. It's a quickie.
This is a bit of a challenging question based on what I believe is true. That racism is actually a fraud that's perpetrated by colonialism. That racism did not exist in the Ottoman Empire or the Roman Empire. That we are actually subject to racism in order to facilitate colonialism. Colonial modes, as they still exist today, of course, dominated by the corporate sector. So we all condition white and black victims and perpetrators to believe in this mythology, this ideology of racism, but in fact, it's a complete fraud.
That racism is, but do you at least admit
I'm asking whether you agree with any of that information.
I mean, do I agree colonialism has a huge part to play in the development of these inequalities? Yes. Are you saying the inequalities don't exist, or that just that racism is a construct?
I believe, like in France, colonial equality issues exist around socioeconomic problems, social problems, but not ethnicity. In France, ethnicity is not a problem. Ethnicity is a problem in the UK and in USA and in other countries that are subject to this racist ideology. But it's an economic, there's an economic reason for racism to exist. And we are dominated by that ideology, and we can hardly think our way in or out of racism, and we do it ourselves.
I mean, I do believe that France is pretty racist myself. For me, the systemic inequalities are what we're trying to address. So whether racism is I don't think it's a myth, only because I can see it in action. I can see it in action in the bodies that are piling up in my home country. I can see it in action here. Now we've just celebrated. We've just mourned another year after Grenfell. So for me, racism is very real, and France is very racist. For me, the colonialism does play a role. I will agree with you on that. Absolutely plays a role in the construct of how we've been divided and how inequalities persist. But I definitely believe racism is real. I think that might be a longer discussion, though.